Okay, so today's daf yomi is Bava Kamma daf Tezvav, Bava Kamma 15. We're going to start on the bottom of Yudal and Amabez 14b, 5 lines from the bottom, that the Mishnah had said that if it was a situation of that in order for there to be damages, it needs to take place on the basis of witnesses. So the Gemara says, Pratal Moda Bekinas. This comes to exclude a case for a person where it was supposed to be a penalty, and as opposed to a compensatory payment, a penalty payment, which is called a kinas. So if a person admits to the kinas, if he comes to the court and he admits to it, and then the witnesses came after the fact, and under those circumstances, under those circumstances, he's exempt. So therefore, there he would not be liable. The witnesses have to come in advance of the admission. Mara says, but that's only according to one approach. That's only good according to the approach who says that if witnesses admit to it and after the witnesses come, he's exempt. Now, but according to one who says that if he admits to it and then the witnesses come, he's still liable. How would they interpret this phrase? How would they interpret this phrase on the basis of witnesses? Because he's going to be, even if he admits it, he's going to be liable. So the Gemara says, safe it's shichalek. Now we're going to need it for the last clause, where the last clause is talking about, of that statement, it says, b'nei choron and b'nei bris, that the witnesses have to be free people, and they also have to be Jewish. So b'nei choron, they have to be free witnesses, they can't be slaves. If slaves testify about the damage, we don't accept it. B'nei bris, Jewish people exclude idolaters. We need it to be taught about both slaves and idolaters that they can't testify. If we just said slaves, because slaves, they have no lineage, and so therefore that's the reason why we can't rely upon them. But an idolater, he has lineage, we might say it doesn't matter. And if we said idolaters, mitzvos, because idolaters, they're not involved in the mitzvos. They don't do any, the idolaters have no commandments, therefore they can't testify. But a slave is shayach b'mitzvos. He does certain mitzvos, a slave, all those mitzvos that are not time-bound positive commandments, he does. So therefore I might think he can testify about damages. So tzricha, we need to say he can't. Gemara says, and women are included in the category of damages. So what's the source? It's just like men are included in the category of damages, so are women. And Gemara is going to say three different possible sources. First source, Isha ki asumiko chatos. Man or woman does any of the sins that they have to confess to their sins. So Hishva kosav Isha ish. This tells us with everything respecting to punishment in the Torah, men and women have the same law. So here too, with respect to damages. The Bei Rabbi Elazar Tana, it says, these are laws that you shall place before them. So men and women have the same laws. Talking about a case where a man or woman were killed by an ox, but it's talking about the death of a man or a woman. Man and woman are the same laws relates to all the deaths of the Torah. So therefore, we see that a woman has the same laws as the man as relates to damages. We need all three verses. If we just had the first verse, it talks about confession of sins. There we would say that she can confess her sins and be atoned, so that she can get an atonement of Odine, but I might have thought as relates to laws, that a man is involved in doing business. So therefore he can be included in these laws of business, but not a woman because she's not involved in business. And then if we just said the laws as relates to laws, we just said this verse as relates to laws, I would say she needs to live. She needs to be able to go to the store and buy things. But I might have thought as relates to atonement, isha bas mitzvah. I might have thought, well, a woman isn't included in the same category of atonement because she doesn't have all the commandments to do. V'yashmin and Anadarti, and if we just had these two teachings, I would say Alcha Mishum Kapar, Alcha Mishum Chiyusa. Okay, in those cases, women are included because she needs atonement and she needs to do business. But, however, in this case, Avoinian Kato, with respect to killing, I would say Ishtabar Mitzvah Lashan Kofer, Ishalo, I would say maybe only the man pays Kofer, only the man pays the ransom, because you only pay the man the ransom for a man because he's the one who does the mitzvos. But a woman not. And if we just had the case of the ransom, I might say their woman's included because somebody died there. But these other two, the Lake Ibn Neshama, I might thought in these other cases where nobody died, we don't include a woman in these categories. So we need all the reverses to teach us that the woman is included in all the categories as the man. Says the Mishnah said, Hanizak v'mazik b'tashlumin, that both the one who is the nizak, the damaged party, and the mazik, the damager, the tortfeasor, they're both included in tashlumin. They're both included in the laws of payment. So the Gemara says, we're going to get to this and what this phrase means in a moment. First, the Gemara asks a fundamental question, powerful question, which we need to think about conceptually to understand. Bava Kamma. It says palga niska, half damages. Remember, we said if an ox scored the first 3 times, it pays half damages. So Rav Papa says the concept of palga niska is memona. It's compensatory. We already, whereas Rav Huna Brei Rav Yeshua says it's kinasa. He says it's a penalty. So we already saw one distinction. What's the difference if it's a penalty or if it's compensatory? If it's a kinas, if it's a penalty, if he admits to it, maybe he's exempt. Whereas if it's compensatory, if he admits to it, he's not exempt. A second distinction, a second nafkamina we'll see at the end of the Gemara, which is that in Babylon, they did not adjudicate cases of penalty. They only did compensatory. They didn't do fines and punishments because they didn't have the authority, because they weren't smuchan, they weren't ordained. So is it palganiska, compensatory, as Rav Papa says, or kinasa, as Rav Yeshua says? So Rav Papa says memona, he says it's compensatory. Kasavar, he's the other position. Stam shvarim labachaska shimor kayamin. Says most oxen we have to assume that they're not watched. So really, you should have to pay everything. The Torah had compassion on the mazik, because his ox still hasn't gored. But technically speaking, he should have to pay everything. So it's compensatory. We give him half. It's compensatory. Rav Huna Brei Rav Yeshua says kinas. He says a penalty because he says we could assume as a baseline that the ox was guarded, that doesn't need to be watched more. But really should have to pay nothing. The Torah is the one who had compassion on him, so that he would. The Torah is the one who penalized him, so that he should guard his ox better. So that's the two approaches. Tanan. So let's try and bring a proof. It says in our Mishnah, Nizak v'mazik b'tashlumin. Both the Nizak and the Mazik share in the payments. This makes sense according to the approach that says it's compensatory. That's why I know the Shach Nizak b'tashlumin. The Nizak is paying because he really should be getting half. But we're saying, listen, since it's his first time, we're cutting him out of half. So you're making up the other half from your loss. But according to Rav Yeshua, who says that it's a Rav Huna Brei Rav Yeshua, who says it's a kinas, well then how is the Nizak making a payment? Hash to a lot of the day shakel. He's not even dealt anything. It's just a penalty on the other guy. But Tashlumin, he say, does he really get? What's he contributing? He's not in the payment. It's not. He's not supposed to get anything. It's just that the Torah's penalizing the other guy, and it's his lucky day. He gets it. Whereas no, it's teaching us that the nizak loses out on the pachas nevela, on the deterioration via the deterioration of the carcass, because it's his loss. The deterioration of the carcass is the loss of the nizak, and so therefore that's how he contributes to the payment. Mar says, but we already learned that in the first clause. Didn't we learn that in the first clause of the Mishnah? Tashlumei nezek. When it comes to the payments, it says Tashlumei nezek, and that teaches us that teaches us that the owner of the carcass is the one who suffers deterioration of the carcass. So it already taught us the law of Pachas Nevela. So the Gemara says, yeah, Pachada Betam, Bechada Bemuad. What is teaching us where the ox that gored was a tam? That the owner of the ox that was killed loses the money when the ox depreciates after it dies. And the other is teaching us that even if the ox that gored it was a muad, it's still the same law. And if it just taught us about a tam, I would say we might say there he suffers the pachas nevela because the animal that gored him was not yet a muad, and so therefore we're not going to penalize the owner so much of a muad. But if it was a muad, I might say therefore he wouldn't lose the pachas nevela in that case. Muad, and if it taught us the law by a shore that had already gored before was a muad, I would say yeah, but mishum the kamashayim kulei. All right, I would say fine because he's paying everything, and so therefore, the mazik doesn't have to suffer the pachas nevela, just the nizak. About tam, but where it's a tam, I might have said imalo there. I would have said maybe that the mazik has the pachas nevela. So we need in all three cases, in both cases. Tashma. So again, we're trying to prove is palgun is because half damage is kinasa. Is it a penalty or is it memona? We said ma bein tam muad. We draw another attempt to prove this. It says in the Mishnah, what's the difference between a tam and a muad? So the difference between a tam and a muad is shatam meshalim chatzi nezik mikufa. The tam pays half damages from its own value. Muad meshalim nazik shalim and aliyah, whereas the muad pays full damages from all of its property. The im isa, and if you're going to say that a tam is kinas and a muad is memona, we should list this case, that this distinction, tam eno mishalim al piatzma, that the tam is a kinas, and so therefore it doesn't pay on its own admission. Muad mishalim al piatzma, whereas the muad is not a kinas, so it pays on its own admission. So doesn't this prove against Rav Huna B'Rei Rav Yeshua that tam is not that palgan is not a kinas, but it's memona? Mor says no. Mor says Tana Vashir. The Tana didn't have an exhaustive list. It left out certain things. It left out that a tam doesn't pay. So Mor says, well, if that's the case, my share, I share. What else did it leave out? You can't just say left out one thing. Mor says Shir Chatzi Kofer. It left out the case of Chatzi Kofer. What's the case of half ransom? If you have a shor muad that kills a man, the ox gores and kills a man, he pays a kofer, the ransom, to the heirs. But let's say it was a tam ox that gored and killed a man. So then the question is, according to Rabbanan, he doesn't pay anything. He doesn't pay anything, even half a ransom. But Rabbi Yossi Aglili is going to say he pays half a kofer if it's a tam. So the Gemara's assumption, go back to the Gemara, it says Shir Chatzi Kofer. You left out the case of half ransom, in the case of half ransom, we're going to say that under those circumstances, in the case of half ransom, that the muad pays full damages and the tam pays nothing. Gemara says no. If you want to say it's because of Chatzi Kofer, Rav Shirahu, because Hamani Rabbi Yossi Aglili. No, you say our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who says Tam Misham Chatzi Kofer. So we already say that case because there, under those circumstances, our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who says the tam that gores and kills a man doesn't pay zero, but it pays half damages. So it's like the other cases of tam. And so therefore, that's not a case of something that was left out. So again, we're trying to prove, is it a kinas or memona, tashna, on the top of Tes Vav Amud Beis. Hemis Shorias Ploni. Let's say if a person comes to the court and he says, my ox killed this man, Shorish Ploni, or he killed this other ox, or he admits it, but yet he still pays. So it's Moda Bekinas, and he still pays. Moda, he admits it still pays. It must be, it's Memona. And what's the case here? Myla Betam. Aren't we talking about a case of Tam, where if he would have been quiet, he would have paid half damages, but because even though he admitted he pays, and so doesn't that prove that is Memona not Kinas, like Rav Papa? Gemara says no. Well, my love, Tam. No, Gemara says we're talking about a muad of a tam, but what will be for the case with a tam? It will be like a Kinas, and he wouldn't pay on his own admission. Gemara says, my problem with that is the Yachad Tani Seifa. What about the next clause in the Mishnah, which says, Hamis Shori Es Avdo? He says, my ox killed his slave of this person. Hamis Shori Es Avdo Shaponi. Hamis Shalom Al Piaz. Well, that the next clause says that if my ox killed the slave, there it's a kinas according to everybody because it's 30 shekel, and then he doesn't pay on his own admission. But if you're going to say that the first case was not a tam, but was a muad, you could have you could have drawn a distinction within the first case. You could say, when do we say you don't pay on your own admission? B'muad. If it would be a muad, aval tam, eno misham al piatzmo. But when do we say that you pay on your own admission? That's by a muad. But if it would be a tam, he doesn't pay on his own admission. So therefore, we could have drawn a distinction within that case. The Gemara says, no, kula b'muad kamari. No, the Mishnah didn't want to bring in the concept of tam at all. It's just talking about shur muad in general. And so therefore, by your ox is a muad, and of course another person, even though you admitted it's memona, but if of course a slave, it's a kinas. Okay, tashma ze'aklal kolam. So we again have not proved is the paganiska memona or kinasa. So again, going to try and prove it from a brisa. What does the brisa say? Ze'aklal kol masham yoser al mashahizik eno masham al piatzo. What's the definition of a kinas? Where we say a modeh b'kinas, that if you admit to the penalty, you're exempt. So the brisa says this is the general rule: whoever pays more than the damage. And then if he admits it, he doesn't pay it. Whoever's supposed to pay more than the damage, if he admits it on himself, if he comes and admits it, he doesn't pay because his mode of kinasi is exempt. My love, isn't the inference from here that if he typically pays less than what he's damaged, that if he would pay less than what that if he paid less than what he's supposed to, then the actual payment he would pay. And so doesn't that mean that a tam is compensatory and not a kinas? Because even if he admitted he paid, no, that's not the implication. The implication is, if he is supposed to pay exactly according to the compensatory amount, then he can't admit and get out of it. But what would be the case of that if it was less, if the amount he's supposed to pay is less, there'd be a kinas, then he'd be exempt. Mara says, well, if that's the case, if that's the case, the wording of the price is off. It should say, it should say whoever doesn't pay exactly according to his damage, if he admits it, he's exempt. Which implies more or less. So for the fact that it doesn't say that, we see from here that if you pay less, it is compensatory to yufta. So it doesn't disprove, it's a refutation of the idea of the one of Rafuna Breder of Yeshua who says it's kinas. So then Gemara says, so even though we just refuted Rafuna Breder of Yeshua, and the Gemara is a refutation that proves that Palganiska is Mimona, that half damages are Mimona. The Gemara then says the law is that half damages are a kinas. So the Gemara says, I don't understand kinas of a tiyufta. The Gemara says tiyufta ve'elchasa. I don't understand. We just refuted the idea that it's compensatory, and then after that we said halacha that it's kinas. Where it says in time and ma'ave tiyufta, because the reason why you thought it was a refutation, you were wrong. What's the reason why you thought it was a refutation? Mishum Katani Kamosha Izik, because it doesn't say in the brisa if you do the damage exactly the same way, if the payment is exactly like the damage, that's memona. So that proves that even less is memona. That was your assumption, but well, psiko. But the brisa didn't want to say that because that's not a complete case. Because there is a case where it's less and it is still memona. Why? Even the ikar chatzi nezek tzroros, because there's the case of half damages, which are tsuroros, which will basically, if the animal kicks off pebbles while it's walking and those pebbles go and damage someone, that's called tsuroros. And there you pay half damages. And so, but the rabbis have an assumption that have halacha that is compensatory. So we see from here that there is a case of half damages where it's compensatory. So therefore, the Mishnah didn't want to list its formulation of the general rule in that manner, and so therefore it's not a proof against our Mishnah, which says that to the approach it says that half damages are kinasa. So therefore we can conclude that half damages are kinasa. So the Gemara says, well, now that you've established The Palganiska is Kina. So now that you've established that half damages are money, hi Kaba, let's say you have a dog. We're going into fighting territory. People are very, very close to dogs. So I hope I don't say anything insensitive. Please forgive me. That is not my approach. That is not my intent. Hi Kaba Dachal Imre. Let's say you have a dog that ate a sheep, or a Shunra Dachal Tarnagoa, or a cat that ate a hen. Mishuna, that's unusual. So since it's half damages, so that would be a case of Tom. So you pay half damages. But since we say it's a kanas, it's a penalty, we don't collect it in Babylon. So therefore, if somebody's dog eats a sheep, you can't collect that from anything from him in Babylon. That's if the sheep was or the chicken were big. But if those were small animals, well, that is the normal manner. And then you'd have to pay full damages. And if the person who's owed the money seizes it in Babylon, we wouldn't take the money, we wouldn't take it back from him. And if the Nizak says to the Mazik, okay, you can't judge it in Babylon, so let's establish a time and we'll go to Israel. Then we establish a time for them to go to Israel to have the case adjudicated. Vilo Azon, if the mazik doesn't go, mishamtinale, we excommunicate him. We always excommunicate such a mazik adam until he gets rid of the dangerous element from his house. The Rabbi Nasan, the tiny Rabbi Nasan, Omer minayin shelo yigadel adam kelav ra v'soch beiso. A person is not allowed to raise a bad dog in their house. You're not allowed to put up a rickety ladder in your house because the verse says, with respect to making a fence around your house, you're not allowed to place blood in your house. From the fact that it says b'veisecha means say anything in your house. You have to be very, very careful. So you can't have anything dangerous in your house. And by the way, this is not just physical, like a dog that's dangerous, but even spiritual. You can't have anything that's spiritually dangerous in your house because it could create a terrible tragedy. So that's the Gemara. So now we go on to the next Mishnah. Chamisha Tamin, there are 5 categories of Tam. 5 types of damages the animal does that we're going to say it's Mishuna, it's unusual, and you only pay half damages. Chamisha Muadin, and there are 5 that are Muadin, that it's usual, and so therefore they pay full damages. Habahima in a muadis, the animal is not considered a usual muad. Loli gach to gore, loli gov to push, loli shuch to bite, loli boats to stretch down on the utensils and break them, loli boat and not to kick. Hashain, but as it comes to tooth, as to eating the food where it's in front of him, muadis le'echol saroilo. If there's food in front of it that the animal typically eats, we can assume it would do damage by eating that food, and therefore have to pay full damages. So to the animal's muad, it's assumed that it will break whatever it walks on in the normal path. Vishor muad, vishor mazik, vishor muad, and an ox that's already gored before, we can assume it will gore again. Vishor mazik, precious anisak. And also, if you're an ox that's in the domain of the party that you damage, well, you have no permission to be there, and so therefore it's considered a muad. Adam, and also a person is going to be always considered a muad. A man is always, whatever damage he does, we assume it's full damages. Let's say you have a wolf, a lion, a bear, a leopard, a bardos, which we're going to discuss, called an appa. There's going to be a lot of range of opinions what a bardos is. And these animals are always considered to be muad. Even if you say, oh, I tamed the bear, doesn't matter. They're always going to be muad from the beginning of their creation, and they pay full damages. If you own a bear and it bites someone, you pay full damages. Whereas Rebbe Lazar says, no, bisman shehem b'nei tarbo, these animals can be domesticated. And if they're domesticated, ain't in muad, and they pay half damages. They're not a muad. Nachash, muad la'olam, the snake is always going to be considered a muad. The snake is always going to be considered like it's dangerous. And that's even more than the oxen. And so This is a question because the Gemara in Brachos, Daf Lamed tells us that if you're standing in prayer, you shouldn't stop even if there's a nachash surrounding your heel. And there the Gemara says, but if you see oxen, you should stop even if you're in the middle of prayer, which implies that oxen is more dangerous than a snake. And so there's a lot of discussion about that. How can we understand it? But the snake is always muad. The snake is always muad to do damage. So the Gemara says, Midiktani, Hashem muedes le'echol, from the fact that it says the tooth is ready to eat at all times. Miklal, the bechatzar nizak. We're obviously talking about it in the courtyard of the nizak. The katani behema ene muedes l'shalom kula. And still, since that, even though that's the whole scenario, we're saying that if the animal gores, it pays half damages. Avochatzi nezek mishtalemes. It doesn't pay the full, but it pays the half damages when it's in the domain of the nizak. But that must be only like the position of the Rabbanan who say mishuna karen b'chatzar nizak chatzi nezek mishalem. That if an animal gores for the first time in the courtyard of the nizak, he pays half damages. However, shoramua ema seifa. But what's the next? What's the next position? The next clause of the Mishnah says shor muad v'shor mazik b'rshus hanizak v'adam, that if it's a shor muad, or if it's an ox that gores in the domain of the nizak, or if it's a person, and that implies that they pay full damages. So if that's the case, also in Rabbi Carpenter Amar Mishuna Karen, that it says under those circumstances that if you're in the domain of the nizak, you pay full damages, even if it's a tam, even if it's never gored before. So that's Rabbi Tarfan's position. It says nezek shalim with the misham, that he pays full damages. So what are we going to say here? Reisha Rabbanan v'sefer Rabbi Tarfan. Do we really want to say that the first clause is the Rabbanan, who say that if you're in the domain of the nizak, you pay half damages, whereas the next clause is the position of Rabbi Tarfan, who says that if you're in the domain of the nizak, you pay full damages? So the Gemara says, yes, that's exactly what we want to say. That's exactly what we want to say. We want to say in Amar Leishmol Rabbi Yehuda Shina Shvok Mas Nisin V'Sabas Reish Rabbanan V'Seifa Rabbi Tarfon. So that's the first answer, and we're going to pick this up, God willing, the Daf Yomi for Shabbos, and again at noon today with the second answer of the Gemara. We'll stop here the recording.